Before we speak of history, before names or dates or certainty, there is this moment. The moment just after the surface lets go of you. Sound thins first. The sharp world above loosens its grip, and what replaces it is not silence, but something kinder, a rounded hush, like the inside of a shell. Light follows, slowing as it sinks, stretching itself into long, pale threads that drift instead of fall. Stay here. Let your breathing lengthen until it begins to resemble the water itself. In, a gentle lift. Out, a slower settling. We will keep this pace together. The sea does not rush us. It never has. As we descend, the blue deepens, not suddenly, but patiently, layer by layer, as though the water is teaching the eyes how to rest. The warmth of the surface fades into coolness, not cold, not sharp, just enough to soften the edges of the body, to ask the shoulders to release what they have been holding all day. There is movement here, but none of it is urgent. Fine silt drifts like breath made visible. Particles turn slowly, catching light for a second, then letting it go. Somewhere below, stone waits without expectation. Listen, what you hear now is smaller than sound. The faint brush of water against water. The quiet rearranging of grains. The feeling of pages turning very slowly in a book no one is hurrying to finish. The first shapes appear gently, as if the sea is careful not to startle us. A curve, then another. A rim of stone softened by algae, its edges rounded not by damage, but by patience. Time here has not broken anything. It has only changed the texture of attention. Imagine sinking the way one settles into a deep chair, the kind that knows the body well. Knees soften. The spine forgets to brace. Weight and buoyancy exist together, and the body accepts the contradiction without needing to solve it. Sunlight reaches down in a thin, woven pattern now, brushing over green growth that clings to stone like a remembered gesture. Algae sways in unison, slow and deliberate, as if rehearsing a motion it has performed for centuries. There are small lives passing through this space, creatures that measure time in minutes, not alarms. Their movements are economical, unbothered, and watching them teaches the nervous system how to slow without instruction. Then the shape clarifies. A ring of stone emerges fully from the blue-green veil. Its surface is muted, dulled into quiet harmony with the sea. Any sharp carving that once declared meaning has been softened into suggestion. Grooves become textures, edges become curves, inscriptions dissolve into something closer to touch than language. We recognize it without effort. An altar, not dramatic, not elevated, simply a place where attention once gathered. The word altar does not ask for reverence here. It asks for stillness. It asks us to notice how small things were once placed with care: oil, grain, salt, light, and how the sea has accepted those gestures without judgment, keeping their shape while releasing their purpose. Imagine your feet finding the seabed. The silt yields gently, cool and porous beneath the toes. The body answers immediately. The jaw unclenches, the breath drops lower, the space behind the eyes softens. This is not an unveiling. Nothing is revealed with ceremony. We are not here to conquer mystery. We are here to stand beside it. Between us and the stones, currents move like a slow reader, pausing at each line. They trace the bowls, the shallow hollows where offerings once rested, combing algae across the surface as if smoothing a memory. Tiny flashes of light gather briefly in these curves, then drift away again. We will not force names onto what we see. Instead, we will use gentler language. Perhaps, it may be that, one could suppose, these phrases leave room for rest. They allow history to remain breathable. Notice how comfortable the not knowing feels here. How the sea does not require explanation in order to hold meaning. Objects endure, not as records, but as presences, altered, softened, still sufficient. There is comfort in this. Comfort in knowing that what was once handled with care still exists, even if the hands are gone. Comfort in realizing that memory does not need sharp edges to remain intact. So we let the sea translate the stones in its own slow language, and we allow ourselves to be translated as well. Breathing becomes rounder. Thoughts lose their corners. The body drifts toward the pleasant heaviness that precedes rest. At times, our attention will narrow to a single detail: the mossed rim of a bowl, the slow rise of a single bubble. And when it does, we are invited inward, to the water within us. The gentle lift beneath the ribs, the hollow at the base of the skull loosening with each exhale. We keep our wonder low and steady. There is awe here, but it does not demand wakefulness. It sits quietly, content to accompany the edges of sleep. Stay with the dimming light. Stay with the thickening hush. The stones breathe with the sea, and as they do, our breathing becomes its echo. We move slowly through these submerged rooms, and if sleep arrives before every detail is named, that is not a loss. It is an answer. Allow the pause to be enough. Let the sea keep what it has always kept. We remember shorelines as if they were old books, their pages rubbed by wind and salt, and we approach them with the gentle scholarship of readers who prefer margin notes to headlines. The smell of salt gathers in the throat as a memory. The scrape of pebble on hull is a single, patient consonant. We stand, in thought, on a harbor quay where ropes sigh against posts, and we listen for the small economies of sound that make a day by the sea. First, the harbor, nets folded like sleeping cloths, the soft clink of pottery being stacked, the careful footsteps of fish sellers who know by feel which boxes will open to good light. Can we allow ourselves to be taught by such small noises? One might suppose so. They are, after all, the grammar of a working shore. Later, an avenue of oaks runs back from the salt into soil. Their leaves sound like low coins when the wind passes, and beneath them small shrines were set, little altars for journeys and for safe return. We imagine children running between roots, their laughter folded into the bark as if the tree itself had learned a lullaby. At home, the hearth holds an ordinary magnificence. Oil warmed in a small bowl, bread halved with care, the soft clatter of cups. A woman leans, perhaps, to whisper a benediction to a clay token before it is set down. That token will see the same moon as the person who gave it, and then different moons when the sea takes it. The tidal plain is another stage. Mud that remembers footprints like faint letters, salt-tolerant herbs that the villagers pluck as offerings, shallow pools that catch sky and reflect small, patient clouds. Men and women move there in the hush of dawn, lowering nets or leaving a pinch of grain. These are gestures that do not demand spectacle, only attention. We pause between these set pieces to note the way ritual was threaded through routine. It is a curious fact that small domestic acts become sacred when repeated enough. A pot left on a stone, an oil smear rubbed between fingers, a coin tucked into a hollow. These converge over years into a communal grammar. There is also a calendar written in weather and tide, the season for sowing, the season for stopping, the nights marked by certain stars. We say names softly, late bronze, early iron, only to anchor ourselves. These names are like signposts along a road we walk slowly. A scholar's aside, the word altar in these pockets often meant a humble ledge or a marked stone rather than a grand temple. Civic religion lived elsewhere, while neighborhood rituals stayed intimate. We lean into that distinction because it comforts a listener who prefers small truths to grand claims. In speaking of offerings, we keep the language of touch. Shells placed face down, so their inner shine is preserved, herbs pressed between tiles, a small ceramic bowl left to collect rain. These objects were not abandoned so much as entrusted, folded into the world's custody. Throughout these scenes our bodies answer. A slackening at the shoulders, a softening at the jaw, the breath lengthening as if matching the span of an incoming tide. Notice this now, with us. Feel ribs ease on the inhale and a broader quiet on the exhale. We carry these small rituals forward in imagination, and in that carrying they remain serviceable, beloved, and quietly luminous in the mind's tidy light and patient. There are several patient ways to tell the story of a place that drifts away from its own shore, and we will try them all, slowly, like tasting small sips of a cool broth. One theory is the gentle hypothesis of return, that the sea, over long centuries, nudged the line of shore inward through soft increments of time. One small winter, one long spring, until stones that had stood at the water's edge simply found themselves standing within it. Imagine the town waking to incremental changes, a new tidal pool where yesterday was path, a slightly salt-crisp scent under the doors, a child noticing shells in a place where shells had not been before. We feel the body answering this imagery, a tightening at the nape, a soft exhale that comes with comprehension. This patient return is a story of gentleness, of long arithmetic where each small addition becomes inevitable in aggregate. It is also the sort of account that allows the human heart to fold itself into understanding. We did not vanish in a single scream, but rather drifted into a different kind of keeping. Another account is more abrupt and almost as kind in its own way, the sudden inlet. In a single season, perhaps, an earthquake or an angry storm opened a new throat to the sea, reshaping channels and swallowing low-lying fields. One might suppose that such a thing would be loud in the records, but often the loudness is made private. The creak of a crossbeam, the torn cloth of a sail, the hush that follows. In the sudden inlet scenario, we imagine a night of astonishment. Lamps making brief moons in windows, dogs that bark and then fall silent, hands pressing at thresholds that will not hold. There is proximity here, intestines of houses exposed to wind. One thinks of the warm weight of a pot left on a hearth, and the way such ordinary objects become anchors for a memory that refuses to be tidy. A third possibility is the human undoing, slow economic decline, gradual migration to larger ports, the quiet abandonment that is almost more erosive than water. Villagers leave for better trade. Altars are visited less frequently. Roofs fail and herb seeds take root in rafters. We hear, in this theory, the soft click of a village being decommissioned, items boxed up, offerings withheld until memory itself grows thin. Each theory answers a different longing. Return suggests nature's patient hand. Sudden inlet gives drama, and slow human leaving explains absence without catastrophe. None exclude the others. Indeed, they sit like different lenses over the same low horizon. It is a curious fact that historical truth often resembles a palimpsest, and our duty is to read the faintest of traces without demanding one true line. Between these accounts we can weave intimate moments of loss. A child's clay whistle left by the door, half buried by silt. A mother's mend left on a stone bench. The footmark of a fisherman last seen at dawn. Alternate these with broader conjectures. Maps with washed edges. Records that list a harbor as small. Bathymetric contours that seem to breathe. And you will have the cadence of this section. Now, let us descend together into a particular moment where the architecture presses a question upon us. The slow, stepped form of a sunken ziggurat. We find, not a towering pyramid, but the suggestion of terraced stone, a deliberate stacking that once guided sight lines and bodies. We touch the terraces with the careful imagination of divers, fingers grazing terraces smooth to the thickness of palms, algae hanging like hair, small fish threading in the crevices. The ziggurat steps make rooms of light and shadow beneath the waves, and in one of those rooms we find an inner chamber, an enclosed place softened by silt. We enter it together in thought. The opening is low, and we stoop as one might stoop into an alcove. The water hush is thicker here, as if muffled by layers of history. In the chamber, there is a single object, small, decisive, a carved peg the size of a child's thumb, worn smooth in the center where a finger once turned it. That thumb-shaped peg gives us a spine for feeling. It is not a treasure in the showy sense. It is a trace of touch. We imagine the same thumb pressing into clay, shaping offerings, setting down a votive in a practiced gesture. The discovery is intimate rather than explanatory. It answers the need for human scale amidst geological forces. We hold that image and let the mind absorb it. A small object carrying a great conversation, a child's plaything that became part of a ritual matrix. There is a private astonishment in finding such an item, a tender proof that ordinary hands once moved here in ordinary ways. Alternating scale, from the step of the ziggurat to the thumb peg, is exactly how we balance wonder with consolation. The large architecture suggests ceremony and view lines. The small object returns us to skin and habit. These theories, this chamber, the peg, none of them force a narrative. Rather, they permit a temperament that lives with uncertainty, that can keep 2 or 3 plausible stories simultaneously and rest comfortably in the space between. We might, as careful readers, ask what leans us toward one account or another, pottery in disrupted layers, or ledgers that simply stop noting a harbor. Such signs are small and stubborn. I am put in mind of a library losing a wing. First a reader lessens, then a shelf goes unwritten, and finally a desk remains with its lamp unlit. There is no single drama, only a soft attrition that changes how people belong to a place. There are humble artifacts that argue tenderly for continued life. A spindle whorl tucked beneath a beam, a smear of red clay on a tile, a child's sandal with straps undone. These objects do not proclaim, they insist, with the quiet of habit. And in our modernness, we add new textures. The thin cough of a diver's regulator, a sonar line like a pencil on water, the slow click of a camera in low light, which translates silence into readable marks without removing its hush. So we keep our hypotheses as companions rather than verdicts. We allow the sight its layered explanations. The doubt is, in truth, comfortable, for it lets the mind remain soft and the heart unstartled. We arrive in modern noise as if stepping into a library with a single, deliberate cough, and the first recognitions come as small, domestic events rather than headline discoveries. A net snags where it should not, an odd resistance, a curious weight that is not fish but a line of stone beneath weed. The fisherman holds the rope and feels the slow, patient giving of history. His palms remember the texture before his mind has named it. Later, a photograph appears on a small screen, a grainy, sun-flecked image of a line of stones glimpsed in shallow clarity. The picture is modest, almost accidental, but it carries a sudden tenderness, the kind that makes one sift drawers for old letters. There is also a sonar blip, a thin electronic punctuation that translates depth into a line on a glowing panel. The blip is not a shout. It is a soft reminder that there are shapes where maps had been blank. We listen to the machine as one listens to a cautious friend, noting the irregularities and pauses between tones. A diver reaches down in low light and the world becomes tactile. The rasp of gloves on stone, the faint static of a regulator, the warm puff of breath against a mask. We feel, with the diver, the cool pressure at our temples, and we notice our breathing slow in sympathy. At the lab table there are new textures, trays of silt like small landscapes, gloves peeling away with a soft sound, a magnifier lifting a grain of ceramic into incandescent detail. Machines murmur in the background, centrifuges, low whirs, transforming silence into a steady rhythm. And there are public walks where people gather on a reclaiming shore to look at tide lines and at small photos pinned to a board. The crowd's voices are low, like careful pages turning. Elders point with the gentleness of people who have learned how to speak of loss without spectacle. Each small recognition translates private hush into communal language. A snag becomes a line on a report. A photo becomes an exhibit slide. A blip becomes a plotted coordinate. These translations are invitations to notice rather than triumphs. We attend to the tactile astonishment of first contact, the hand that runs across a carved rim and finds it smoother than expected, the glove that returns speckled with ancient lime, the tiny flake of pigment that comes away like a secret. These are moments that make the work feel like delicate rescue rather than conquest. There is a tender private discovery we keep to ourselves. A young diver finds, tucked beneath a scallop of stone, a child's whistle of baked clay. He cradles it as if it might still hold a breath. His fingers do not hurry. We imagine his chest unclenching as he realizes he is not the first to breathe in this chamber. Acoustic textures deserve attention. Sonar pulses are like slow heartbeats beneath a map. Camera shutters click with bright authority. The soft suction of pumps and the patient whir of centrifuges translate labor into music. We let these sounds sit in separate registers beneath voice, low enough to support but not to startle. The ziggurat's terraces speak differently to machines than to hands. A sonar line will flatten a step into shade. A camera might miss the inner curve where light never reaches. Still, when human touch arrives, a gloved finger finding a peg, a palm lifting silt from an incision, the sight answers with immediacy. We picture a diver working by torchlight in the inner chamber, the beam cutting a narrow river through thick water. The torch reveals a faint motif on a stone face, and the diver's hand, moving with slow reverence, brushes away silt to let a thumb mark reappear. The chamber's sound becomes a hush within a hush. The muffled drawing of breath, the near-silent click of a camera, the slight scrape of a tool. On shore, the laboratory's white light and the sea's dim palette converse. Notes are made, sketches folded, samples labeled in slow cursive. A tech lifts a sliver of shell under magnification and nods as if at a dear sentence. Machines whisper, humans interpret. These modern recognitions are acts of translation that restore scale and story. A sonar blip becomes a measured terrace, which becomes an image, which becomes, in a quiet gallery, a child's whistle laid upon a velvet of silt. We learn to be translators who do not shout. Throughout this process, we feel our own bodies respond. A steadying at the base of the skull, a lengthening of the exhale as machinery hums beneath our attention. Allow yourself, now, to notice the breath slowing with us, in and a longer, softer out. There are quieter formalities, permissions exchanged like delicate letters. A conservator who speaks of consolidation with the tone of someone reciting a prayer, a diver who, when asked, offers a single sentence and then looks away, protective as someone shielding a child. Discovery here is communal taking in. No trumpet, only careful inventory of things that will now be tended. The modern sounds fade into a hum of duty. Pumps, footfalls, pens on paper, the occasional distant gull stitched into the processing soundscape. Quietly, we come close to the stones now, as one lowers a hand to touch a familiar object's worn rim, and the world contracts to the scale of grain and shell. Notice, with us, the texture of limestone under imagined fingertips, not the sharpness of new cut but a soft, patient surface, pocked where tiny lives have taken up residence. There are cup marks here, shallow hollows worn as if by ritual or by repeated hands setting down offerings. Algae silkens their edges into green collars that sway with the lazy current. We follow a single cup mark as if tracing a sentence, letting the eye move slowly along its curve. Our body answers in small ways. The palms unclench, the shoulders drop, and the breath finds a longer arc between each inhalation and exhalation. We feel our feet settle into the imagined silt beneath us, a gentle giving under weight that soothes rather than sinks. In some places, the stone bears faint tool marks beneath the incrustation, a heel of a chisel, a shallow groove, so that the utterances of a maker and the sea's slow edits are layered like two hands writing on the same paper. These marks read as gestures rather than instructions. They suggest an intent that was quiet and local. We linger on the rhythm of repetition: stone, bowl, groove, stone, bowl, groove. The mind rests in the pattern, and as it does, we feel the tidal cadence reflected in our own chest. Small grazers work like patient typists, their minute mouths polishing edges and leaving a patina that is both damage and preservation. Between their work and the sea's slow chemistry, pigments sometimes survive as faint blue or red halos, like color notes left to time. There is a modest economy of objects, a ring of stacked pebbles here, perhaps a deliberate cairn, a shallow channel wafting silt away from a hollow, the worn underside of a basin that once cradled oil. We describe these not to catalog, but to let the fingers of the imagination have something to follow. Consider, for a moment, how algae alters intention. Where once a bowl might have glowed in hearthlight, now it is draped in a living fabric that both obscures and beautifies. The living veil is not a loss, but a translation, devotion translated into growth. A short scholar aside softens our certainty. The presence of cup marks does not, by itself, resolve ritual use from mundane utility. Context is everything. We hold such caution as a kindly lamp. It keeps us from rushing to heroic claims. Touch remains the guiding metaphor. Imagine drawing a thumb across a groove and finding the shallow warmth left by hands long gone. Imagine the coolness of a stone that once absorbed oil, and imagine the way that coolness now returns our attention inward. Some stones form alignments, low ridgelines that suggest sight lines toward distant headlands or to the morning of a particular star. They do not shout their function. They whisper it in repetition and placement. We note these lines as one might note a composer's recurring motif. Between stones, small life collects. Limpets, tubeworms, a scatter of shells that the tide arranges anew each day. Their motion is a slow choreography, and the patterns they make are ephemeral maps that the mind may trace without strain. We spend time on a single object that rewards this attention. A small amphora neck, rim smoothed, once tipped for oil. It sits half buried, its mouth like a quiet well. We imagine the hand that set it down, the fingers that measured a pinch of salt, the wrist that paused in a familiar gesture. And in imagining, we anchor our bodies, chest widening, a softening behind the eyes. These objects are not monuments to greatness, but records of habit. They tell of hands that repeated small acts until those acts became community. In their modesty, they offer consolation. The world attends to smallness, and smallness endures. There is also a palimpsest of growth. Barnacles whose calcified walls adhere like small shields, sponges that have taken up pigments into their fibers, and seaweeds that braid around carved edges. The sea's biography becomes part of the object's story, and we listen to both narratives at once. We make room for a tactile inventory that does not exhaust wonder. The pace of description slows. Sentences lengthen and fold into pauses so the listener may breathe with the tide. If you bring your attention now to the sensation of breath, notice how the exhale lengthens, how weight moves away from shoulders and into the space behind the ribs. Let that movement mirror the slow displacement of silt as a current smooths a rim. We keep repeating small motifs: sand, salt, root, breath, so that the mind settles into recognition and the body follows obediently. Stone, bowl, groove, sand, salt, root, breath. Not every mark must be named, not every stripe explained. Some things are best kept as touchstones for the imagination, quietly available should we wish to return. We sit beside these traces, companioned, and allow sleep to follow as tides fold us into gentle forgetting. We widen our attention now, just enough to let the stones sit within a human day. Not a single heroic moment, but the low tide of routine, the kind of life that repeats itself so faithfully it becomes invisible to history. We drift upward in thought, toward the shore that once lay closer, and we feel the warmth of land return as a memory rather than a fact. Imagine morning first. Dawn arrives without ceremony, pale and practical. Nets are shaken free of sleep, their weights clicking like small teeth. Sand is cool under bare feet, and the air smells of salt and yesterday's fire. We stand with the fisherfolk as they pause, briefly, beside a low stone altar set just beyond the tide line. A shell is placed. A word is not spoken. The sea already knows. It is a curious fact, often overlooked, that devotion in such places was not loud. It was fitted into the margins of labor, pressed gently between tasks. One might suppose that prayer required silence and distance. Here it required only attention. As the sun climbs, the day thickens. We imagine hands mending nets, fingers blackened with pitch and oil, movements practiced enough to free the mind. Nearby, a woman approaches the altar carrying a small bowl, oil infused with herbs crushed that morning. She tips it carefully, not to impress any watching eye, but because carefulness itself is the gesture. We feel the echo of that care in our own bodies. The jaw unclenches, the brow smooths. Season matters here more than date. The people at the edge of the Aegean measured time by return, the return of fish, of birds, of particular winds. Altars served as hinges in this seasonal door, touched before departure and after safe arrival. We note this not to romanticize, but to situate. Ritual braided itself into necessity, and necessity gave ritual its steadiness. At midday, the coast rests. Heat presses lightly on stone and skin. Someone brings bread and olives to the shade near the shrine, crumbs falling into cup marks worn smooth by years of use. Children are told, gently, not to climb the stones, not because they are forbidden, but because they are old. Respect here is an orientation, not a rule. There are offerings that leave no trace at all, a whispered thanks, a pause taken before pushing a boat back into the surf, a moment of stillness while hands are washed of salt. We include these because absence, too, has texture. Toward evening, the rhythm changes again. Smoke lifts from hearths, carrying the resinous sweetness of coastal wood. Sandals scrape. A small procession forms without naming itself. Two neighbors, a cousin, someone's mother, each bringing what the day allowed. A coin dulled by use, a sprig of fennel, a few drops of wine saved from supper. We walk with them, and our breathing slows to match their unhurried steps. It is tempting, from a distance of centuries, to call these acts symbolic. Yet for those who lived them, they were simply correct. The altar was not an abstraction, but a location, a place where the world was addressed politely. A brief scholarly aside drifts in, like a teacher leaning closer. Coastal shrines differed from civic temples not in belief, but in scale and intimacy. No priest was required. No calendar announced the hour. Participation was porous, adaptable, as fluid as the shoreline itself. We sense how such flexibility allowed ritual to endure. When storms came, the altar was moved. When the sea advanced, stones were reset farther inland. Continuity did not require permanence, it required care. This is a lesson the body seems to understand before the mind does. Shoulders soften. The breath drops lower. At night, before sleep, someone returns alone. The tide breathes in and out nearby, audible but not demanding. A hand rests on stone, warm from the day, cooling now, and lingers just long enough to register temperature. That, perhaps, is the offering. We notice how these lives resist drama. There is loss, certainly, nets torn, boats not returned, but grief is folded into routine rather than set apart. The altar receives both thanks and sorrow without distinction. We feel the comfort of that even-handedness. and our own worries seem, for a moment, less sharp. In imagining these people, we are not resurrecting them so much as standing where they once stood. The same wind passes. The same salt settles on the lips. Time thins here, and companionship stretches across it quietly. Bring your attention now to the weight of your body where it rests. Let it feel supported, as those lives were supported by repetition and place. There is nothing required of us but to remain. We let the day close. Dawn nets, midday shade, evening smoke. The cycle loops, gentle and sufficient. The altar does not demand memory, it accepts presence. And so do we, easing toward rest, companioned by lives that understood how to lay the day down without ceremony. We shift now from the human day to a longer breath, one so extended it barely feels like movement at all. If we listen carefully, beneath the water's hush and beneath even memory, there is a deeper cadence still, the slow settling of land, the patient rearranging of weight. Geology, when spoken of quickly, can sound abrupt, faults, ruptures, events. But lived from within, it is almost tender. One small winter follows another. One tide leans in a little farther, then rests. We feel this not as danger, but as a kind of lullaby sung by the earth itself. Imagine the coastline as it once was, familiar, dependable, marked by paths worn smooth by feet. Now imagine nothing dramatic at all, only a fraction of settling, the thickness of a coin spread over a century. Sand shifts, clay compresses, water, always attentive, notices the invitation. It is a curious fact that most sinking is not felt. There is no moment when a village wakes and declares itself lower than the day before. Instead, thresholds change quietly. The tide reaches a stone it never reached before. Salt touches a wall. Someone decides, without quite knowing why, to move an altar a little inland. We hold that image gently, hands lifting a stone already old, resetting it with care. This happened more than once, across generations. Continuity was maintained not by resisting change, but by accommodating it. Our own bodies seem to recognize this wisdom. The chest loosens. The breath grows slower, deeper. Beneath the Aegean, tectonic plates speak in murmurs. They slide past one another with glacial courtesy, their movements measured in millimeters and centuries. Occasionally there is a sharper phrase, an earthquake remembered in story, but even these are absorbed, eventually, into a wider calm. Subsidence follows. Sediment settles like fine dust in a quiet room. Each grain is insignificant. Together they rewrite the shoreline. Freshwater springs, once accessible, are swallowed. Paths blur. And the altars, those low, patient stones, find themselves visited by waves instead of feet. We do not frame this as loss alone. The sea does not take, it receives. Water fills the spaces land relinquishes, smoothing edges, cooling surfaces, teaching stone how to wait differently. Algae arrives not as a conqueror, but as a soft veil, transforming exposure into shelter. Consider time here not as a line, but as depth. The deeper we imagine, the slower everything becomes. A century passes like a breath held. A millennium drifts like sleep. We feel our own sense of urgency dissolve in this scale, replaced by something wider and kinder. There is science in this, of course. Isostatic adjustment, eustatic rise, but we keep such terms folded away, as one might keep formal clothes for another occasion. What matters now is the rhythm. Press, release, sink, rest. The earth inhales stone. The sea exhales silence. Low frequency sounds help us feel this even if we cannot hear them fully. A distant rumble, imagined rather than perceived, moves through the water like a long sigh. It does not alarm. It reassures. Something large is holding everything steady. The altars sink not in a moment, but across lifetimes. A child places a shell where her grandmother once placed grain. Decades later, the shell is damp. Later still, submerged. At no point does the ritual break, it simply changes audience. We pause here, letting that settle. Our own weight feels pleasantly anchored. The surface concerns of the day drift upward and away. What remains is pressure without strain, depth without fear. It is tempting to imagine resistance. Walls built higher, stones dragged back. Sometimes this happened. More often, there was a yielding that carried dignity. The sea was not an enemy, but a neighbor with expanding needs. As centuries pass, memory thins. The reason an altar was placed exactly here grows vague, then mythic, then silent. But the placement itself endures. Stones remember even when stories do not. We notice how this comforts rather than saddens us. Nothing is required to stay exactly where it began. Even devotion is allowed to drift, as long as it remains sincere. Our breathing mirrors this permission. Slower on the exhale, longer pauses between thoughts. Now imagine the moment when water finally stays. The tide comes in and does not quite leave. A film of green settles. Fish begin to pass where feet once stood. There is no witness, and therefore no alarm. Only a new equilibrium finding its shape. We let ourselves rest inside that image. The world rearranges itself without hurry. The altars accept their new condition with the same patience they always had. And we, listening, feel how deeply natural it is to be carried somewhere quieter. With the altars settled now into their new, unhurried depth, our attention drifts outward, not to escape, but to notice how echoes travel. The sea, after all, is an excellent keeper of patterns. It repeats gestures across distance, reshaping them gently so they fit new shores. We imagine ourselves gliding from basin to basin, never hurried, the water carrying us as a thought carries memory. Far from the Aegean, yet somehow familiar, other stones wait in similar patience. Their edges differ, their languages once did too, but their posture is recognizably the same. Along another Mediterranean coast, low sanctuaries lie where fishermen once paused to rinse their hands. Here, too, stones were arranged in circles or lines, attentive to sunrise and return. We do not catalog them exhaustively. We allow them to appear like constellations, briefly, then fade. It is tempting, when making comparisons, to seek origin, who influenced whom, which rite traveled first. But such questions feel less urgent in water. The sea suggests another model, many beginnings, converging gestures. People everywhere learn to thank what carried them, and to place that thanks somewhere durable. We sense how the Aegean altars belong to a family rather than a lineage. Island shrines in the Cyclades, submerged causeways near Sicily, quiet offerings found off Levantine shores. Each speaks in its own accent, yet the tone remains gentle. Myth drifts in here, as it always does, softened by repetition. Stories tell of sea gods who listened closely, of nymphs who kept watch where land thinned into tide. In some tellings, offerings turned to coral. In others, they sank intact, waiting for another age to notice them. We do not choose between these versions. We let them coexist like overlapping currents. A small scholarly aside surfaces, then settles. Comparative archaeology often reveals less about contact than about need. Similar problems, unpredictable seas, fragile boats, hopeful departures, invite similar solutions. The altar becomes an answer shaped by hands and fear and gratitude alike. We return, again and again, to our primary site. This is not favoritism, but familiarity. Just as one returns to a favorite cove even after seeing many, our attention curves back to the Aegean stones softened by algae. They feel like home now. Imagine standing, or rather floating, between these places, sensing the quiet kinship among them. The sea does not separate, it connects. Water moves stories without words, passing them from shore to shore in salt and rhythm. Some myths speak of entire cities choosing the water, walking calmly into it at dusk. Others tell of sanctuaries that slipped below without ceremony, continuing their purpose unseen. These are not tales of punishment. They are explanations shaped to fit acceptance. We notice how our own mind responds to this widening. Thoughts loosen their grip. Comparisons do not demand resolution. They simply offer perspective, and perspective is restful. There is comfort in knowing that what we attend to here was never isolated. Devotion, like erosion, is a shared process. Stones across seas were smoothed by similar hands, similar hopes. The realization does not excite, it settles. We let the imagery grow broad, then broader still. The seafloor opens into imagined plains, dotted with remnants that glow faintly in filtered light. A distant chime, perhaps ceramic, perhaps imagined, marks no location in particular. It is simply a sound that belongs to depth. Gradually, the comparisons thin. We no longer need to name places. The pattern is understood in the body rather than the intellect. A pause offered, a stone touched, a quiet thanks given to water. We drift back, untroubled by distance, to the Aegean basin. The altars wait exactly as we left them, unchanged by our wandering. This, too, is reassuring. Some things remain steady while we roam. Let your breathing follow that assurance now. Inhale as the thought widens. Exhale as it returns. There is no edge to reach, no conclusion to draw. Only the calm recognition that we are part of a long, gentle echo. Now, with the larger shapes understood, we allow ourselves the luxury of wandering. Not away from the altars, exactly, but around them, the way one circles a familiar thought when sleep is near, touching it from different angles without needing to arrive anywhere new. A hermit crab moves across the stone beside us, its progress deliberate and faintly comic. Shell borrowed, body vulnerable, it pauses often, antennae testing the water like questions asked politely. We follow its pace, and our own thoughts slow to match. There is plankton here, too, invisible until it decides otherwise. When disturbed, it answers with light, a brief constellation stirred by a fin, a sleeve, an imagined hand. Tiny lanterns, switched on and off without instruction. We notice how the glow fades almost as soon as it appears, leaving no desire for more. Algae sways in long strands, green and brown, and almost gold where the light thins. It moves like hair in sleep, responsive to currents it does not resist. Some strands brush the carved edges of the altar bowls, and for a moment it looks as though the stone itself is breathing. There is an old sailor's belief, one of those half-serious, half-smiling notions, that certain stones listen better at night, not because they hear more, but because fewer people are speaking. We do not test this belief. We simply enjoy the quiet it implies. A small myth drifts by, barely formed. A goddess, unnamed, who preferred the edges of things. Doorways, shorelines, moments just before departure. She did not ask for temples, only pauses, only attention. It is said she settled gladly among submerged altars, relieved of expectation. We hum softly here, not aloud, but in the chest. The sound does not travel far. It is for us alone. Humming, after all, is thought made gentle. Another tangent, the way sound behaves underwater. It bends, it carries, it arrives before its source. A distant knock might be a pebble, or it might be nothing at all. The uncertainty is soothing. We do not need to identify every echo. Some divers speak of feeling watched, not by creatures, but by space itself. We translate this not as fear, but as awareness, the sense that a place has weight and presence. The altars have this quality. They do not demand, but they notice. Consider the bowls carved into stone. Rain once filled them, then seawater. Now sometimes silt, sometimes a shell. They are containers without insistence. We find this deeply restful. A folk etymology surfaces, a word for offering that once meant simply setting down, not giving away, not sacrificing, just placing something carefully where it could be found later or not. The distinction feels important, though we cannot quite say why. The mind, unburdened by purpose, begins to loop gently. We notice repetition not as redundancy, but as comfort. Stone, water, breath. Stone, water, breath. Each cycle a little softer than the last. A memory that is not ours arrives anyway. A lullaby sung off-key, the words forgotten, the tune sufficient. Perhaps it belonged to a fisherman, perhaps to no one in particular. It dissolves before it can finish, leaving only its intention. We feel how the body responds to this meandering. Muscles let go in stages. First the face, then the shoulders, then the long muscles of the back. The sea, imagined or remembered, supports without comment. Another small curiosity: barnacles close themselves when disturbed, sealing water inside. Even they understand rest as an act of practice. We smile inwardly at this, then let the smile fade. The tangents grow shorter now. Thoughts arrive, already tired. Images blur at the edges. The altars remain, but we no longer examine them. They are simply there, reliable as the sound of distant surf. We allow silence to lengthen between ideas. Nothing presses in to fill it. This, too, is a gift of the deep. Stay here a moment longer, with no task at all. The sea keeps watch. We do not have to. We return now to the smallest scale, not because it is lesser, but because it asks the least of us. Here, meaning rests lightly in the palm. Weight is measured not in importance, but in touch. A shell lies half buried near one of the altars, its spiral intact, its color muted to chalk and pearl. Once, it may have been chosen for its shine, its echo when held to the ear. Now it listens only to water. We imagine lifting it, feeling how little effort that would take, and how complete the gesture might feel. Coins appear occasionally, too, not scattered, but placed. Bronze softened to green, edges blurred into kindness. They do not glitter. They do not ask to be counted. Their value has slipped free of exchange and settled into presence. There are fragments of pottery, no longer vessels in the ordinary sense. A rim without a body, a base without a bowl. We resist the urge to reconstruct them fully. Brokenness here is not failure. It is a stage of listening. A faint stain clings to stone, pigment once mixed with oil, perhaps citrus-scented, perhaps resinous. We cannot be sure. The color lingers anyway, absorbed into limestone grain. We breathe slowly and imagine scent without insisting on accuracy. Some offerings were meant to dissolve. Bread left for birds. Wine poured out and gone. Others were chosen precisely because they would stay. Stone beads, shells, carved pegs smoothed by fingers before placement. The distinction matters less than the intention behind it. A small amphor fragment catches our attention. Thumb mark visible where clay was once pinched thin. This is not decoration. It is evidence of hesitation. A pause where the maker adjusted pressure, felt the shape respond. We linger with that thumb mark longer than we might with any inscription. One might suppose that symbols explain objects. Here, the opposite feels true. The objects explain the symbols or render them unnecessary. A spiral carved shallowly into stone might mean return, or water, or nothing at all beyond this felt right. We feel how the body responds to this lack of insistence. There is no puzzle to solve, no answer to extract. Our shoulders sink further. The jaw loosens. Attention becomes soft rather than sharp. Shells, coins, bowls, stains, each becomes less an artifact and more a companion. They have outlived urgency. They are content to be noticed briefly, then left alone. A scholarly thought drifts through, gentle and unclaimed. Once submerged, objects enter a different economy. Human intention gives way to marine use. A bowl becomes shelter. A coin becomes anchor for algae. Meaning is not erased, it is shared. We imagine how these objects sounded when they were placed. The small click of shell on stone. The dull ring of metal. The hush that followed. Sound mattered, perhaps more than permanence. Now, underwater, the sounds are altered. Everything is muffled, rounded, returned. The sea has a way of editing excess. We find that comforting. Another offering appears only in imagination. A lock of hair, once tied with fiber, long since gone. We include it anyway. Not all offerings need to survive to be counted. We notice how few objects are truly personal, and how many are simply available. What mattered was not ownership, but suitability. The right weight, the right feel. Hold one of these objects in thought now, any one. Feel its temperature, its texture. There is no need to assign meaning. Just let it rest there, supported. As we do, our breathing slows again. The pause between breaths lengthens, like the space between tides. Objects teach us this without instruction. When we set the object down, gently, without ceremony, nothing is lost. The altar receives it. The sea keeps it. We remain unburdened. We let the image dim slightly, as if light were thinning. The objects are still present, but no longer require our attention. They will wait. They always have. We do not descend any further now. Instead, we let the water settle around us, as feelings do when they are finally given time. This is where emotion lives in such places, not as a surge, but as a current that moves steadily beneath awareness, reliable and uninsistent. Melancholy arrives first, though gently, like evening rather than night. It is the knowledge that hands once warmed these stones, that voices once hovered here and then moved on. There is no sharpness to this realization. It carries the softness of something expected, long accepted. We sense how absence can be spacious rather than hollow. The altars are not lonely. They are accompanied by water, by growth, by time itself. We feel how this reframes our own understanding of loss, not as erasure, but as change of company. Wonder follows quietly, not the bright wonder of discovery, but the sustained kind, the sort that persists without feeding on surprise. The fact that these stones remain, still arranged, still attentive, feels less astonishing than reassuring. Some intentions are durable simply because they were modest. A thought surfaces, scholarly and tender at once. Rituals rarely aim for immortality. They aim for correctness, for being done at the right moment, in the right way, with the right weight of attention. Everything beyond that is gift. We let this idea move through us slowly. The chest rises. The chest falls. Breath becomes tide. Tide becomes breath. There is a sense of being held within a larger rhythm that does not require our effort. Companionship emerges here, too. Not with any single figure from the past, but with continuity itself. We are accompanied by repetition, by the fact that others paused as we pause, placed care as we place attention. The feeling is warm, almost domestic. Melancholy, when shared, loses its edge. It becomes reflective rather than heavy. We notice this shift in the body. The brow smooths, the mouth rests open slightly, the hands loosen their habitual curl. There is comfort in recognizing that the sea did not interrupt devotion, it extended it. The altars continue to receive light, growth, passing fish, our own quiet regard. This ongoingness feels like permission. We think, briefly, of how often we rush to preserve, to freeze moments before they change. Here, preservation came through allowance, through letting things become something else. The insight lands softly, without demand. A repeated phrase begins to form, not as instruction, but as reassurance. We lay this down, and the sea keeps it. We lay this down, and the sea keeps it. Each repetition feels lighter. The phrase does not need emphasis. It settles where it needs to settle, then rests. Wonder and melancholy no longer feel distinct. They blend into a single tone, a low, steady hum of recognition. Things pass. Things remain. Neither condition is wrong. We sense how this understanding steadies us. The mind releases its grip on narrative. There is no arc to complete, no lesson to extract. Only presence, shared across time and water. Let your attention rest now on the space just behind the eyes, where thought thins naturally. Allow images to blur, edges softening like stone under algae. The altars remain below us, unchanged by our reflection. They do not respond, yet they receive. This is enough. We breathe together once more, slow and deep. With the exhale, we set down whatever we carried here. The sea accepts it without comment. We lay this down, and the sea keeps it. We lay this down, and the sea keeps it. We do not need to go anywhere now. Everything that required noticing has been noticed, and everything else may remain exactly as it is. The light thins almost imperceptibly. What was blue becomes deeper blue, then something closer to shade than color. Algae curtains draw inward, not closing, just resting. Silt settles, each grain choosing its place without instruction. The altars remain below, steady and untroubled. They do not recede. We simply stop reaching toward them. This feels natural, like loosening a hand that has been holding something gently for a long time. There is no ending here in the ordinary sense. The sea continues. Stone continues. Attention, having done its work, is free to soften. We sense weight and buoyancy together now, the pleasant contradiction of being held while also floating. The body understands this instinctively. Muscles release in quiet sequence. Breath drops low and wide. If thoughts arise, they do so without edges. They drift past like fish we do not need to name. If images linger, they blur kindly, as if the water itself were editing them for rest. A single image remains, simple enough to keep. A shallow bowl, carved long ago, cradling a wash of moonlight filtered through water. Nothing placed inside it, nothing required. We let that image dim. We do not replace it. Now the voice itself grows less necessary. Words shorten, pauses lengthen, meaning has already arrived. We are safe to sleep. We are held. We are not late. We lay this down. The sea keeps it. We lay this down. The sea keeps it. Breath in, slow, easy. Breath out, longer still. We lay this down. The sea keeps it.